Genesis 46 through 48. Now, these chapters continue in the Joseph narrative that we've been looking at, and here we see the family coming together once again. Now, all the way back since chapter 12, we have been focusing in on the line of one man, and that is the line of Abraham. We have seen God's promises to him of a kingdom slowly come to fruition. There was the child of promise that was born to Abraham and Sarah, Isaac. Then to Isaac, we remember, was born Jacob and Esau. And we know that only one of those sons was included in the chosen nation and the covenant of God. And so that was Jacob. And now 12 sons have been born to Jacob, and they each now have fathered several children. One of Jacob's sons, Joseph, we know as a ruler in Egypt, although we know that the Israelite kings later will not come from Joseph, but they will come from Judah. Now, there were also two kings after the kingdom split that we'll find in Kings after Solomon's reign. There were two kings that came, Jeroboam and his son, from the line of Ephraim, which is from the house of Judah. But for the most part, it's the kings came from Judah. And the promise that there would be an eternal king on the throne was given to David, who was of the house of the lineage of Judah. And we also saw that the land promised to them. It was an eternal possession. This is the land of Canaan, which we find Jacob now leaving for the second time. Remember, he left once to go and find a wife. And we see him now on the verge of the promised land, just about to leave it, just right on the edge. How will God's promises come about outside the promised land? So look here at chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes." Here we have Jacob at the wells that Abraham dug, poised on the southern border of Canaan. He had likely heard of the covenant that God had made with Abraham, specifically the parts in chapter 15 that included enslavement and oppression in a foreign land. He probably had some misgivings about going down to Egypt. Not only that, but he probably had heard about how Abram had tried to escape a famine and gone down to Egypt and was told by God not to do that, chastised by God. And he had probably heard how his father Isaac had went on his way to Egypt to escape yet another famine and was stopped in his tracks by God from leaving the land of Canaan and instead was turned to live with Abimelech. But now God speaks with Jacob, reassuring him that it is according to his plan that Jacob will travel to Egypt to live. Verse 5, Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They took their livestock and their property, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Notice the emphasis of the text, over and over and over. All. It was all the house of Jacob. They all went down, sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters. They all went down to Egypt. There was no one left to hold down the fort in the promised land. They all moved to Egypt. And so with all of the wealth then that Jacob had due to God's blessing on him, this must have been quite the procession. This must have been quite the company moving from the promised land down through the desert into Egypt. The narrative is now interrupted by a genealogy. And this genealogy then details the company that was being moved to Egypt from Canaan. This is dwarfed by the massive nation that's going to return from there many years later. Look at verse 8. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel: Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, the sons of Reuben, Hanok and Palu and Hezron and Carmi, the names of Simeon, or the sons of Simeon, Jemuel and Jamin and Ohad and Jachin and Zoar and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman, the sons of Lehi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. You'll have those three memorized when we get to Leviticus. The sons of Judah, and Onan and Shelah and Perez and Zerah. But remember, and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Now remember that Perez is the one through whom Jesus comes. Now the sons of Issachar, Tola and Puvah and Yob and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, Sered and Elon and Jalil. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram with his daughter Dinah. All his sons and his daughters through Leah numbered 33. Quite the company. The sons of Gad, Ziphion and Haggai, Shuni and Esbon, Eri and Arodi and Arali. The sons of Asher, Imnah and Ishva and Ishvi and Beriah and their sister Sarah. Try to keep all those straight. And the sons of Beriah, Eber and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Leah, and she bore to Jacob these 16 persons. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. Now to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. The sons of Benjamin were Bela and Becher and Eshbel, Gera and Naaman, Ahai and Rosh, Mupim and Hupim and Ard. He was a busy man. They were running out of names, I guess. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob. There were 14 persons in all. And so God had answered Rachel's prayer and multiplied her offspring. And he's going to answer that here in a while even more. And he's going to even more promise to multiply Rachel's offspring. Now the sons of Dan, Hushim. And the sons of Naphtali, Jazil and Guni and Jezer and Shillem. These are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and she bore these to Jacob. There were 7 persons in all. All the persons then belonging to Jacob, here's the point, who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all, and the sons of Joseph who were born to him were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. A major ordeal, right? To move all of that and all of their possessions, all of their things down to Egypt. Now remember that Jacob had left the land of Canaan the first time with only the clothes that were upon his back. Remember, his father didn't even send him a gift. He didn't send him a dowry or anything to pay the dowry for Rebekah. But God blessed him and God multiplied him, and despite the hard work and the harsh treatment from Laban, God was with him. God had protected him from Esau, giving him much favor in his eyes, and he brought him back from Canaan, or to Canaan from Paddan Aram, laden with wealth, and that wealth has only now grown. Now he is leaving Canaan, not by himself, but with a household of 70 descendants, along with a caravan of possessions, and along with a caravan of gifts that Pharaoh had sent. Verse 28, now he sent Judah before him to Joseph, to point out the way before him to Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face that you are alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, that you may live in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is loathsome to the Egyptians. So then in this way, God is moving the sons of Israel to a place, as we've said before, that they will be unable to marry into the nations. They will not be able to assimilate themselves into the nations and lose their unique and special identity. They were in constant danger, we've seen over and over, of marrying into the Canaanite nations. There were even a couple sons, I think, listed in this genealogy that said that they were from a Canaanite woman. And so they were constantly in danger of this, of marrying themselves off into the nations. But since Egyptians loathe shepherds, there's not the chance of this. The nation is going to be left to itself to multiply until the time that the sins of the Amorite are completed, just as it was prophesied to Abraham in chapter 15. Now look at the next chapter. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen." He took 5 men, seemingly at random, from his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" So they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock." What grace is this, that God is so richly blessing the sons of Israel as they move into the land of Egypt, giving them favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, that he would not only give them the land that they asked for, not only give them all that they need, but also would even supply them with employment, that they would tend his livestock. In verse 7, then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" So Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning." At this point, at 130 years old, he is about 50 years shy of Abraham and Isaac. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. Notice he blesses Pharaoh twice, once when he comes in and once when he exits. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to their little ones. So here we have essentially the ruler of one nation greeting the ruler of the other. And Pharaoh here defers to Jacob, quite possibly because of his age. Egyptians admired those who were long-lived, and Jacob was certainly a long-lived man, even though he humbly puts it that he is only 130 years, a man of few years compared to his father. But here we have Jacob blessing Pharaoh, and as I said, he's blessing Pharaoh twice. So here we have pictured Jacob as being greater than Pharaoh. Now, in this next part, we resume the narrative that what happened before the brothers came back into the picture. We're going to tie up the loose end about what happened to the rest of the country of Egypt. And so we see here the power of Pharaoh continues to grow, and it's all because of Joseph. Verse 13, now there was no food in all the land, because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. For why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys, and he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent, and the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and give our land for food. Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate." So here we have, due to the famine and Joseph's shrewd bargaining, the power of Pharaoh growing. The power of Pharaoh was growing. First, Joseph acquires their livestock for Pharaoh, and then he acquires the land and the people for Pharaoh. Notice here the irony. As Israel is free in the land to multiply and to continue to grow in wealth and prosper, now the Egyptians, the very people of the land, are not free. They're made slaves of Pharaoh, and their wealth is given to Pharaoh. And so it is that Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is the seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, for seed on the field, and for your food, and for those of your households, and for food for your little ones." So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves." Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. And the people rejoice. Now, there is no end of literature. I waded through some of it, calling Joseph a tyrant and Hitler because he enacted slavery upon the people. But look at the response of the people. This is Moses telling us that Joseph's administration was fair, that Joseph's administration was wise. And the people rejoiced in it, that he had saved their lives. And not only that, but he was completely fair because he only exacted a 20% tax, whereas most places in the ancient Near East, I read, exacted a 33% tax. So instead of a third, he exacts a fifth of everything that they bring in. So the people then recognize that he is saving them from certain impoverishment and death. And he is extending kindness to them instead of extorting them. Notice also the difference as Joseph is bringing the Egyptians into slavery to Egypt, how fair he is, how well he treats them. And then later on, when we get to the Exodus, contrast that with how the Pharaoh treats the Israelite slaves. And he's harsh and he mistreats them. So we see here Joseph, the wise and fair leader who gathers power for Pharaoh. And in fact, he has a law that is still enacted, still in place when Moses writes the Torah some 450 years later. That is how wise and fair Joseph was. Now, the sons of Israel live in Goshen for quite a while. Verse 27, now Israel lived in the land of Egypt, in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have said." He said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. Now, remember, all the way back at the beginning of chapter 46, which we saw just a few minutes ago, God has sworn to bring Jacob up from the land of Canaan, or back up into the land of Canaan. Jacob recognized that this pertained not only to him, but to his seed, but he knew it would be a promise for him. So as he sees his time to die drawing near, he makes his son promise that he will not leave him in the land of Egypt, but instead he will take him and he will bury him in the land of Canaan next to Abraham, next to Isaac, and with Leah in the cave that we saw Abraham buy at Machpelah. And in chapter 48 now, it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in his bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz," which is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And he said to me, "Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and excuse me, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem." So Jacob here recites the promise of God to multiply his seed, to make them very numerous, to make them become a company of peoples, and to give the land of Canaan to his descendants for an everlasting possession. Every time you come across that, underline it. It's an everlasting, non-ending possession. Jacob had thought that he had lost one of his sons, but instead he ended up not only gaining his son back, but gaining two more grandchildren. And here we see Jacob claiming them as his own. And in this way, then, he is bestowing the birthright to Joseph. Joseph is getting the double portion of the inheritance. It's not going to Reuben. It's not going to Simeon. Instead, the firstborn of Rachel is going to get the double portion of the inheritance. And this way, he says he's going to honor Rachel, who is not buried with Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and he in Machpelah, but instead, she is going to be the favored one because he is giving the double portion to Joseph, her son. Now, when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Now, probably he'd lived there 17 years. Of course, he's seen his grandchildren. It's probably part of the process here, part of the legal process. And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well." Then Joseph took them from probably by his knees where they were sitting, because they were more than 20 by this point, and bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. And may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And so Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, and the same time blessing the house of Joseph, invoking God to bless the boys, to make them fruitful, to make them a multitude on the earth. Look here at Jacob's understanding of God, how it has grown since Bethel when he first encountered God. Now he has truly come to know, as he called it, El Bethel, the God of Bethel, the God before whom Abraham walked, the God whom Isaac walked before. He recognizes that God has been the shepherd of his life, guiding events, sovereignly orchestrating everything for his good. And now he knows God as Redeemer from evil. Last of all, he knows God to be absolutely, totally faithful to his covenant. Now, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him. And he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Usually it seems that Joseph knows what's going to happen right in advance, but he didn't quite get this one. But Jacob, of course, who was the younger, who was given the precedent over his brother, knew about this. And so prophetically, he crosses his hands, saying that the firstborn would not be the one that would get the blessing, but instead the most blessing would go to the younger. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." And he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And in fact, Ephraim will grow so much, they will multiply so much, there will be a massive nation, or a massive tribe in the nation of Israel. Now, as I said, that is the way that God is answering Rachel's prayer. He is making Ephraim, the son of Joseph, to be a big and multitudinous nation. In fact, by metonymy later, Ephraim will be a reference to Israel. Israel will be referred to as Ephraim. This would be like us calling the United States by New York or California, or if you want to go by size of territory, I guess Alaska. So then Israel, verse 21, said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow." Now here at the end of his life, Jacob has grown to trust the promises of God. He's not trying to manipulate things like we saw earlier in his life. He's trusting God to make things work out. There's no way that he could influence events. No man could influence events 400 years in the future. And this is the amount of time that lays between these final chapters of Genesis and the first chapters of Exodus. More than 400 years. A massive gap of time between Genesis and Exodus. Such a massive gap of time that we could fit just about all of the history of the Americas within that time. 400 years ago, the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, 1620, 400 years ago. It's an immense amount of time. So much happened between here and then. But yet, we know God was completely and utterly in control the whole time. And the point is, Jacob is trusting him now. Jacob trusts the promises of God. May we be obedient like Jacob. May we be trusting as he was trusting, to know that God will bring about his promises in his way at his time. Let us be faithful to obey with gladness. Let us be wise in our actions. Let us be compassionate like Joseph was. And let us rejoice in the kindness of God who blesses without measure. Let us always know the good pleasure of God to bless us in every way, just as his children and his covenant people. Let us trust that the promises that God gave to Abraham, the promises to Isaac, the promises to Jacob, will all be fulfilled in full to Israel and to us, and that we, as the first fruits of salvation in Jesus Christ, will partake of the blessings that are therein. how important these chapters are for us as a church, for the church as a whole even today. As we begin to wrap up the study and conclude the study in Genesis, I can't help but to feel the weight of the entrustment of the Word of God. How poor the church is because we do not focus on these chapters. Not just chapters 1 through 3, not just chapters 1 through 11, but every single bit of it, every single portion written for our instruction, written for our edification. All of these stories that you and I and every Christian has probably known for years and years and years, now coming together before our eyes to point us with one massive arrow toward Jesus Christ and toward the end when everything will be fulfilled. The church today, I've said it before, the church today is a people without a future. They don't study the future because they don't think about the future. They only look at the present. Our culture is a culture of the present. We're wrapped up in now. We're too busy to think about the future, except to how it pertains about me, and even that is short-sighted. They look at the present, but they don't look at the future, and they certainly, we are finding, don't look at the past. Because if they looked at the past, and they looked at the past way back and the origin of all things here in Genesis, they would find that constantly we are being pointed to what is even to us future. Constantly pointed to the end when the promises of God will all come to fruition and will all be fulfilled. So we've begun to see here the kingdom program of God in process. God is moving the events of history toward the restoration of all things, to the conditions of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 before sin entered into the world, before the entire world was plunged into sin and its consequences. A major part of this kingdom program we know is redemption, and God promised that to come through the seed of the woman. Throughout chapters 4 through 11, we have seen the evidence of the full reign of sin in the heart of mankind, as mankind became so evil that God had to purge the earth through the flood. But 8 people survived. And after the flood reject God and pursue the lusts of their hearts, and despite the depravity of man, God is still gracious. Redeemer through the line of Adam, through the son of Seth, through Noah, through Abraham. And God appeared to Abraham, and God promised him that he would become a kingdom. He promised Abraham nothing short of a kingdom. And we find out that from this kingdom will come an everlasting king, the seed of the woman, who will crush the head of the serpent, who will rule over the descendants of Abraham, the nation, and who will rule over the land that God has promised to give to Abraham. You must have a king, you must have land, and you must have people to rule a nation, to have a kingdom. And all those things were in the Abrahamic promise, therefore God giving Abraham a kingdom. And the Lord did not set his love upon Israel because they were the most numerous of any nations, but rather God's promise came to just one man, to Abraham. He chose them because he loved them, and he swore his oath to Abraham to bring about his eternal plans. He goes on then to make them a great nation, dwelling in the midst of the world. He sets his presence among them in a very special way. He teaches them the holiness and the righteousness that he expects from them as his covenant people, whom he lives in the midst of. He raises up a godly King David, to whom he promises a descendant to reign on his throne forever. And even though the sons of Israel continually, over and over, disobey time and time again, God demonstrates his faithfulness to them. Even when he punishes them for their sin, he sends his prophets to tell them there is not an end to the covenants. There is no end. They cannot be canceled. They are eternal. They are everlasting. I always love reading Jeremiah, and God constantly says, as sure as the sun is fixed in the sky and the earth moves around it, so my promises will come to pass. And even though God has set his people aside for a time, he is now, even now, not through with them. For at the fullness of time, God brought forth the seed of the woman out from Israel, Jesus, the Messiah, who became the high priest and the rightful king over Israel, who will conquer the entire world, who will rule over it in peace. His kingdom will be everlasting. His kingdom will be one of righteousness, and he will reign forever and ever and ever. And aren't you and I glad to be part of that kingdom? We are citizens of this king. That's how it all fits into history. Father, thank you for this text. Lord, we thank you for Genesis and everything that we've learned from it. Thank you that at the fullness of time, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, born of a woman, born of the sons of Israel. Thank you that he fulfilled the law in every way, for we could not. He pleased you in every respect, for we did not. And Lord, he was obedient even to the point of death, and how he loved us to go to the cross, to take the penalty for our sin, to atone for all the sin that we've committed. And God, we believe in him, and we believe the promises that you have promised to us through him, and the promises that you have promised to Israel, and we know that they will come to pass. Thank you for this study. Help us to dwell on these things and be encouraged by them. In Jesus' name, amen.